Welcome to the GovDiscovery AI podcast with Mike Shanley, your source for actionable insight into government markets and foreign policy. GovDiscovery AI leverages a decade of experience winning federal funding to deliver intel to sales, proposal, and capture teams working in defense and civilian markets. Now here's your host, Mike Shanley.
Hello and welcome to the GovDiscovery AI podcast. My guest today is a repeat guest on the show, Jeff Grieco. Jeff is a ISOA Board Member Emeritus, President and CEO of the U.S. Afghanistan Chamber of Commerce, and former Assistant Administrator for Congressional and Public Affairs at USAID. Jeff has a lot of insight on the European context, as well as business opportunities for contractors and industry looking to sell to both DoD as well as NATO. And we'll get into an exciting ISOA event in September in Romania that both Jeff and myself will be attending. So with that, Jeff, great to have you back on the show. Thanks for taking some time to share your expertise with us.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, let's get right into it. What is the current geopolitical context in Europe? I think we're all getting updates day to day of what's changing, but it's worthwhile to take a step back and just look at where do we stand as of July 2025?
Yeah, so the Ukraine conflict has, I think, increasingly regionalized now, although I think in American media and in front of the American public, we still look at it as a Ukraine-Russia conflict. But when you really delve into the structural reforms that are now driving NATO and driving the procurement systems within all the NATO countries, trying to achieve the 5% requirement that they've signed up to as a NATO member, although we should note some of the NATO members are already stepping back from that and saying they'll not adhere to it, Spain being one of them, which is only at 1.3% of GDP spending right now. So there is a huge amount of change happening in Europe, and that's why I talk about this conflict now really has regionalized and is making the leaderships within the European states begin to really reanalyze their ally relationships, whether it's with the US or Canada or Great Britain or others. And they're also starting to analyze whether or not they should, as a collective security, maintain this 5% of GDP spending for defense going forward. The conflict has not gotten better. If anything, more Ukrainians are dying on the front lines today, as the Russians have really perfected, with the help of Iran, the drone capacities. I noted that in one day, 784 Russian drones attacked Ukraine. That's the highest number in a single day. But U.S. defense analysts have announced that they think they'll be able to do 2,000 drones by November per day. Now, this is causing also a huge defense burden on the Russians from a money standpoint and from a technology standpoint. So the situation, I would say, is really changing and evolving. The Trump administration does have a particular difference in approach than the Biden administration, where the Biden administration attempted to really focus on the collective aspects of European defense and trying not to overcommit more of their direct budget support after they spent billions and billions on the direct budget transfers. And I still to this day have not seen any of the Inspector General reports. Remember the first few Inspector General reports on all those cash transfers, they came out and said, we have no idea where the money went because we weren't operational in country to be able to monitor where that money went. So that's a separate issue. But Trump has stopped that cash transfer basis. He's now focused on only selling into Ukraine weapons systems or having the Europeans pay the U.S. for the weapons system, and then the U.S. would transfer to the Ukrainians upon the completion of that sale. That was the agreement that NATO just worked out with President Trump about a week and a half ago here in Washington. So when you look at Ukraine right now, what are the biggest priorities for the Ukrainians based on their current status? I think, well, first of all, we, the U.S., have really, I think, under Trump now have ramped up the coordination mechanism that before on my trips to Kiev, it was very obvious that the embassy and SAGU were not managing to the level they needed to for the Ukrainians to be able to have adequate defense, especially on the frontline force posture. The Ukrainians army directly told us that they're not receiving the repair and logistical support that they need to keep, whether it's a Bradley fighting vehicle or artillery on the front lines operational, unless these 100 different weapon systems could be serviced in country closer to the front line. Biden's position, largely, I think it was Sullivan's position, the national security advisor to Biden, he did not want to have any U.S. corporates supporting defense systems and services inside the country. Trump has alleviated that rule, but they're still very cautious about not putting them too close to the front lines. Just one note is Boeing has opened a service center in Kiev, and the Russians attacked it about a month ago. I think it was a drone strike. So there is an escalation inside as the U.S. is getting more focused on delivering support services to the Ukrainians. Just to give you an example, the Europeans have stepped up in a lot of ways. The Czechs have taken on artillery shells as their major focus because it was such a shortage and probably the prosecution of the war about 12 months ago. Now that's less of an issue, and the U.S. has increased some of its artillery support as well. We are hoping that we're going to see more, like one of our International Stability Operations Association members, Amentum, they were servicing Bradley fighting vehicles out of Poland. And I'm not going to discuss where they're doing it now, but I think they understood that this is not a functional capacity to support the Ukraine frontline defense. So we have seen parts of this system now getting better, and the Ukrainians are getting that support. They're not talking about it, frankly, publicly, and that's fine. They don't want to make someone attack it. But if you step back right now and look at the biggest support priorities for the Ukrainians and the Europeans, they're fairly aligned. First, they're focused on the air defense systems. They don't have enough. They want more Patriot missiles, not just the launchers, but they need missiles because they're depleting the missiles on a lot of these missile strikes that the Russians are doing in volume, or drone or unmanned vehicle strikes. Second area of needed support is artillery support. The Europeans now are looking at that as a NATO priority. So NATO is now beginning to really ramp up who's going to take on the artillery support procurement process. Lastly is infantry vehicles. They're being able to, not just for the Europeans, but for the United States, to project force if the Russians should decide to move into Poland or try to take Moldova, which the Polish frankly expect. The Polish have gone from about 130,000 conscripted troops only 2 years ago to now, by the end of this year, they should be over 400,000 conscripted troops. They're expecting war with Russia.
That's more than a 3x increase there.
Right, and they the Polish, more probably than any country I've met in our conferences in Warsaw or in Kyiv, the Polish really do expect war to happen. They've already started building a lot of their defense, ground defensive systems to coordinate with not just NATO, but with the U.S., who would come in as a supporting role to stabilize and stop the invasion from moving further into Europe, which gets us to this whole issue of Romania. And I'll let you decide where you'd like me to go on that.
Yeah, let's jump right into that right now, and we'll share, for those of you watching live or on YouTube, we'll share a map of Ukraine and the region here, Jeff. So go for it.
All right. So as you'll see, Constanța, which is the Romanian deep water port that Mike is putting a box around right now, Constanța is the largest deep water port adjacent to Odessa, another deep water port. If the Russians permanently take Odessa, Constanța becomes the major port that has deep water capacity to take a U.S. fleet, and for the United States Armed Forces to respond to an invasion of Moldova or of Poland, as you can see, or of Romania for that matter. The Romanians also expect some kind of Russian malfeasance, whether it's via Belarusian troops, North Korean troops, or others. And so the U.S. defense really of Europe is going to be hinging on access at Constanza largely, not only, but largely. And so from our meetings, both in Warsaw and in Kyiv, we've come to learn that the U.S. is ramping up their bases in and near adjacent to Constanza. They're asking the Romanians to widen the road system and put in more permeable roads for tanks and heavy-duty trucks to be able to be offloaded and put into the region as a use of force. In addition, the Romanians are being more active inside NATO, trying to get the other NATO states to understand the importance of Romania as a defense of Europe, not just for the United States and its support, but also for the Europeans to support Romania as a frontline state and as a backstop in the event Moldova is overrun or Poland is attacked. So it's pretty serious stuff, and it has not gotten better. And we're hopeful that the Trump administration is going to reach some kind of an agreement with Putin. But most of the foreign policy and national security scholars that study Russia, they think Putin is basically playing the international community right now, and they expect if he steps back and reaches some kind of compromise agreement on Ukraine, they don't trust him. They feel that he might try something else with the Belarusians or someone else after that. And so this is not something that's going to go away quickly. And I think most American generals that we've met with and heard from agree with that. And so they're building on the long-term defense of Europe really going forward. Now, NATO's primary focus, which is what the U.S. government has pushed them to do, the Europeans to do, they've outlined their basic needs as follows. First, they need a greater supply of spare parts and repair services closer to these frontline states, Poland, Moldova, Romania, etc. Of course, in Ukraine as well, because Ukraine is in war right now. Secondly, the improvement of air defense systems, not just including the Patriots that the U.S. manufactures, but there is an EU system called the SAMP-T. That system is now going to be ramped up by the Europeans, so it will be a formal NATO procurement vehicle going forward for the SAMP-T. It'll compete with Patriot, but not as much as I think everybody thinks, because there's so much need right now in Europe for these air defense systems. Thirdly, the new commitment of 5%. You got to remember, the 5% of GDP is only broken down into two parts. 3.5% is what they call the core requirement, and the 1.5% is supposed to be in additional support defense services that would come to support the weapons systems themselves. So they break it down that way. So somebody could technically achieve 3% and have fulfilled the core mission that NATO has put to those countries. But the 5% is what the Trump administration is going to hold them to. And we haven't heard, at least I have not seen yet, the Trump's administration's response to Spain saying that they're not going to even agree to this at all. So we'll have to see where that goes, because Trump has said, if you don't pay for the support, we're not giving you any military support. Canada, we should note, still is down at like 2.0 to 2.5. It fluctuates. So they have a ways to go as well. Now, the NATO Procurement Agency is something I think really important for American businesses, especially defense businesses, to understand. The NSPA is going through the most dramatic restructuring of any procurement agency in the world. They are attempting to expand by hundreds of percent the amount of contracts that they're issuing for the defense of Europe based on the Russian threat. They currently have over 75,000 registered and qualified contractors. And for your members, Mike, who are looking at business opportunities in Europe and in Ukraine support, you have to be a registered member of NATO's security contractors online system. In order to they review your system, they look at both classified and unclassified sources, and then they qualify you. You'll get a letter verifying that you have been qualified to support NATO mission. That doesn't mean you've won anything. It means that you're now legit and you can now bid.
Quick question there. For a client already selling to DoD, is it fairly comparable, the level of cybersecurity and other
Yes, very comparable
standards they have?
Yes.
Or is there anything that stands out that is unique to what NATO looks for as opposed to what DoD would look for?
NSPA, I think, also has a focus on small business, which is different maybe than some of the big prime contracts in the U.S. defense system. So they do take serious the small business providers of not just equipment, but of services as well. So there may be a niche there for your companies, especially the smaller businesses, to be able to get work through a NATO procurement system.
And that can be a small business from any NATO country.
Right. And they have to be qualified. Yeah.
Sure, of course. Sure.
All right. So now NSPA is undertaking a whole series of reforms in their procurement platforms themselves. So let me just review with you what these platforms are so that your members will understand how to apply for what their business development needs are. First, there is a NATO trust fund that has been established. I think the goal is to get about $150 billion into the trust fund, and that would be used both for the support of capacity development of NATO member states and non-member states like Ukraine, like Moldova. They can be used for that service as well. It has not had a full, accounting yet of the 150 billion, but they're on their way to getting there, and European states know they have to do this. Next platform that they have is an operational and logistics support and transport sector platform. That is one that typical ISOA companies are very interested in because of their logistical and supply chain mastery over the last 50 years supporting U.S. defense all over the world. The third platform is a general and equipment support service platform. That's one that's very easy to understand. If you go, by the way, to the NSPA website, they have a very good website. It's self-explanatory. They give you most of the data that you need to know for putting in your qualification or your application for qualification. The fourth platform area is engineering and infrastructural support services. This is where you might find U.S. Army Corps issuing activities, procurement activities in partnership with NATO and NSPA. Fifth is the medical and health support requirements. This might be being able to move frontline injured warriors back into more serious medical treatment, and that there's proper medical treatment at the front lines to receive them as well. So this will be a platform that NATO is going to focus on, especially if the conflict widens more than it is right now. Sixth, there is a support mechanism or support platform for what they call sustainment of the 100+ weapon systems that they have. And those were broken down by NATO into about 200 different projects. So you have to really get into those to see where your niche might be best fitting into something on what kind of support system. Some of it Ukraine has prioritized to NATO and to the United States. Some the United States will let NATO take that project, or they'll let perhaps a NATO ally state in Europe take that project. But it's all based on the NSPA's detailed procurement system software. So you want to keep your business development eyes on the NATO industry days when they have them, and on their website. And you can register to receive procurement updates for your target areas within these various platforms, so that you're never, without knowledge about what's going on in the procurement system at NATO, which we're very happy to see. They're working very hard to do it. They're getting support from U.S. Defense Logistics and others as well. So now, if I could take a step back and talk about EUCOM, because it kind of relates to all this discussion as well.
Yeah, and let's transition with a quote from a couple days ago from General Christopher Donahue. He assumed command of U.S. Army Europe and Africa in December 2024. This is on Kaliningrad. That is that Russian enclave in Europe. And the quote is, NATO on all sides in the Army, U.S. Army, and its allies now have the capability to take down from the ground in a time frame that is unheard of and faster than we've ever been able to do it. That's him speaking on Kaliningrad. Jeff, and as we transition, any thoughts on that and that rhetoric? And is that one-off, an outlier, or is there anything we can read into that in terms of U.S. policy over the coming months?
So I'm going to be a little critical of our government for a second here. EUCOM and the U.S. government really writ large, were totally unprepared for the logistical and the defense support systems that they need to sustain Ukraine as an independent state. From the get-go, we didn't have the right systems. We didn't have the budgets put together for it. We didn't have coordination with NATO on these issues. And NATO was kind of also skating along. And then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, Putin's going into Ukraine. What do? We had to build the airplane while we were flying it, really, at the beginning of the conflict. Now, EUCOM now has transitioned itself after almost 3 years, I think, more than 3 years maybe, of war. They are now a warfighting command. And EUCOM, that statement from General Donahue, to me, fits directly in where they're at now. They're no longer struggling on the supply chain, logistical support chains that they need to sustain combat for the Ukrainians. They're now up to speed, and they have war planning completed by the planning offices at the Pentagon, that they're comfortable where they are and where they can go quickly, and that Putin should listen to what our military people are saying. Now, General Kellogg, who is Trump's envoy for Ukraine, he's been over there just in the last few weeks, I believe, as well, and he met with the government. He continues to do a lot of work inside the game with President Trump on what their forward movements will be now that Putin is backing off his commitment to ceasefires and other things. So we are going to see EUCOM focus more on the air and missile defense systems right now. They've already begun shifting to these unmanned aerial defense systems, and there's some new technologies that the Pentagon has announced this week. They're putting a couple $100 million into new lasers that can handle multiple drone attacks and so forth. So they're moving quickly on the procurement side. I think they're taking it very serious. But the biggest procurement, contracting agency for the United States in the region is the U.S. Army Contracting Command. People forget that they have about 12% of all the federal procurements in that command. So 18% of their spend goes to small businesses. So, hey, listen, you need to be looking at U.S. Army and what they're looking at doing in support of EUCOM and the Ukrainians going forward. About 50% of their contracts are competed. So anybody that complains, hey, none of this stuff, it's all on an IDIQ and I can't get on as a sub to the prime and so forth. No, 50% of their contracts are competed, and they do FAR-based contracts, FAR-based contracts. So look at the U.S. Army Contracting Command's websites and network with their officials at the defense conferences themselves.
Well, let's get right into that then, Jeff. We'll both be in Romania in September. I'll be at the DSEI UK conference the week before in London. And talk to me a little bit about the Romania conference. We kind of touched on it already. I know ISOA used to host this in Poland, but the focus will be on U.S. European Command and NATO procurement opportunities. What goes on at this conference? Who should attend?
All right. So this conference, I think, more than any of the other 3 or 4 that we've done in Warsaw, is really important because it is putting a laser focus on the procurements to support the regional defense of Europe, including Black Sea deployments. So the conference is September 15th to the 17th in Bucharest. You can register online at stability-operations.org. That's the ISOA website. I think we're holding it at the Intercontinental in Bucharest. Now, the reason we shifted our conference from Warsaw to Bucharest is just as we talked about earlier, that there needs to be a much bigger discussion, because no one's done it yet, of a focus on the U.S., NATO, and European defense cooperation, really as a regional interconnected defense mechanism. And Romania is going to be the regional heart of that defense, in our view. based on our stuff. So just give you an idea of the kind of panel discussions we're going to have. We'll talk about the Black Sea as a strategic anchor for both EU and NATO's regional defense. There's going to be opportunities to look at NATO and the 2035 5% commitment. Are there opportunities within that for your companies to get procurement opportunities out of those spends? France, Italy, and Belgium are very likely are going to have a tough time meeting the 5% because they already suffer from an incredibly high debt to GDP ratio. So you might see those three stepping back or doing more buy-in through their own industries instead of trying to put money into the kitty, so to speak, for broader defense. We'll have a panel discussion on the private sector partnerships with Romania as a regional defense hub, and then we'll have a panel on private sector support to the Rearm of Europe plan, which is the plan to build up the military industrial base of Europe in support of their national defense. We will also look at holding several business-to-business and business-to-government / procurement institutions. You'll get to meet one-on-one with them in our breakout sessions. It's one of the most popular sessions that we do, and this conference in Bucharest, I predict, will be probably one of the biggest we do because there's so much money now moving in theater for these kinds of activities. Based on wide request of the ISOA members, we'll hold a panel on critical minerals and infrastructure and energy. The energy is really instrumental to being able inside Ukraine to make any infrastructure repairs. You have to have energy support because most of it's been taken out. So we will talk about that and have a panel discussion on it. We will talk about building contracting with greater resilience in Europe. And that'll talk about the CAPS, WECMAC 2.0 and other procurement initiatives. And then we'll also have a big keynote speech on the unified transatlantic defense, which will engage Europe, the United States, and the Eastern European states, especially in that discussion. So that's what we're going to cover in Bucharest. And it's very similar, just to give you an idea. Last year when we did this, here's who we had, organizations that spoke at a high level. EUCOM, U.S. Army Europe and Africa Command, SAGU, NSATU, Armed Forces of Ukraine, Polish Army, 409th Contracting Theater Contracting Center based on the Army Contracting Command. We had NATO, the Deputy Chair of the Military Committee. We had NATO Support and Procurement Agency heads. We had DLA and the troop support both in Europe and Africa. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers heads for Europe District and the 21st Theater Sustainment Command. And we're very proud because we had State Department also and LOGCAP also. LOGCAP Europe was there in combination with the Army Field Support Operation. So very focused, but I think that you're going to see the Bucharest event focus much more intensely on where this is now hitting and where the money is going based on the vehicles that they finally have established.
Well, with that, thank you, Jeff, and looking forward to hearing the final speaker list for the September conference. As we wrap up here, we'd like to ask for a so what for industry. What is the so what? We'll say for the defense industrial base, both in North America as well as allied European partners.
Well, I think, you know what, when we first responded at ISOA to our Ukraine partners, and we did our trips to Kyiv and met with the leadership, and we held the first few conferences in Warsaw, we were really trying to play catch up the entire time on the procurement side, and the contract vehicles were not there. There was a lot of complaints from industry that you have the wrong authorities in some of these contract vehicles and the wrong appropriations vehicles that can fund that activity. So they have fixed most of that now. We now have functional contract vehicles, and they're ready to spend. They have been given a large amount of money through this latest large piece of legislation that the Trump administration passed for FY26. So you're going to see things moving in the next month on where they're going for FY26. And by October 1, they're hoping to start a lot of these vehicles in the region. So I think it's important, if you're looking to build business in support of Ukraine and Europe, you want to be there. You're going to eventually, depending on the size of your organization, You're going to want to have somebody on the ground. You're going to need to look for local partners, local agents that can support your enterprise. You need to have that intel base on the ground in order to support your business development. So, and we know ISOA members are fantastic at doing that. So, and we're here to help if they need help.
We'll be keeping our clients updated on how to keep their messaging, their sales capture and proposal messaging aligned with these evolving priorities. Feel free to message Jeff on LinkedIn. Reach out to me, Mike Shanley, on LinkedIn too, for support on any of this. And Jeff, always great having you on the show, and look forward to seeing you in a couple months in Bucharest.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the GovDiscovery AI podcast with Mike Shanley. GovDiscovery AI leverages our team's decade of experience winning federal funding to deliver federal growth intel to sales, proposal, and capture teams working in defense and civilian markets. Each market intel report is delivered by federal growth experts leveraging our proprietary deep data discovery process. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and connect with GovDiscovery AI and Mike Shanley on LinkedIn, or learn more at govdiscoveryai.com.